once I start recording, you'll consent whether or not it's okay with you. But yeah, so this is our first week where usually Johnny and I are like reflecting on our stories and then we're connecting it to some larger social meeting. But we're really happy that Dr. Taylor and Erica Banta are here today and they're going to facilitate our conversation. And then if folks are interested in facilitating a future session, just reach out to us and we can get that set up. But I'll let you go ahead and get us started, Dr. Taylor.
Yeah, so just a little bit of background. I contacted Whitney. Whitney and I have known each other for a little while now in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space. And I said, hey, what about, the topic of guilt and privilege? And she was like, that sounds like an amazing idea. Do you want to lead a conversation about that? I was like, okay, sure, why not? Because this is such a casual environment where we can just have a discussion and share stories. I thought that'd be great. And so my idea then was, hey, Erica. Erica and I are colleagues in the DEI space at OSU. And I was like, you want to join me? And she so graciously accepted, even though today also happens to be the same day that she did a very successful interview with Mike Anderson, who is a leader in the Workday transition for OSU, and it was a fabulous event. How many people ended up attending? Because I couldn't see the number.
I had 711.
Oh my gosh.
So this is a leadership series that's taking place over the course of 5 weeks. Is that right?
Yeah.
So Gretchen Ritter is on next week. Erica was the interviewer this week, and then other folks from HR will be involved in future conversations. So, wow, 700, that's amazing. So Erica and I discussed this. There was some confusion about what the topic was going to be about. I wanted to talk about guilt and privilege. She thought it was about grief. And then we discovered last night that all of them are related. So today we're going to discuss how grief can then guilt because our grief is associated with privilege. And just to give you an idea, for example, people who were planning these elaborate, expensive weddings have to experience a sense of loss about that and experiencing grief. Yet there are people who can't afford to put food on their table. So there's a great deal of privilege associated with that. The other topic that's not related to grief that Eric and I discussed is issues around race. So we can talk about these issues as much or as little as possible or as you want. But I'm going to share a link to an article that was really compelling to me about the intersection of race in this pandemic, and about how people of color, especially Black men, are not comfortable wearing masks in public due to racial profiling that existed before this, and how that can make them be perceived as a greater threat. Okay. So two potential areas to explore. Maybe some of us or all of us can relate to. Erica, would you like to add anything to that?
I would. I'm just going to dive in. I feel like diving in.
You dive.
I'm going to dive.
Just dive.
I go for walks often with my daughter to get out and get some fresh air, and we just walk around our neighborhood. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the first topic that you mentioned. Dr. Taylor and I had a great conversation over the phone last night just about grief and guilt and how those two things, there can be a big intersect when it comes to privilege and those feelings, and how do we sort of relegate those things in our minds and say that, for instance, as we were walking, we saw many graduation banners in yards. There are high school seniors that are graduating, people that are graduating from college, and the families have been planning these parties, which is great, and we want to celebrate. Those are accomplishments. But I think about, I've seen some posts on social media where people are truly going through those stages of grief around the events that they're unable to do now. You know, whether it's, you know, Leo mentioned weddings, there's graduations, there's, you know, events where kiddos are getting recognized, sports banquets, and there is a true sense of loss for those events right now. And then I think about the people that I see on the news and friends of mine who they're not sure what dinner is going to be next week because they haven't worked and received a paycheck in over a month. And so I'd love to just open up to the group. What thoughts come to mind when we think about that? I think something in that space can really resonate with everyone.
So actually, my daughters and I just recently discussed this.
What did you guys, how did that discussion go? How did that feel?
So actually, my oldest just graduated from college in December, and I have one that'll graduate this time next year from college, and an almost 16-year-old. And in the midst of planning for a 16-year-old's birthday, how that will look, I'm kind of a different parent anyways, and I'm a single parent and grew up in a household where we did have to worry about meals, and I have been off work, I don't know, and have not been paid. But, you know, on a side note, you know, we were discussing that, and I said, for me, we would have our celebration. If we had to have family line up in cars, they would walk, and I would hand them their diploma. Like just how that would look for us and how we would make that more of a personal celebration. Neither of my children enjoyed graduating from high school anyway, because of they enjoyed it, but didn't enjoy it. They did not enjoy the, oh, let's celebrate. It was more of a, they were able to be freed from the racism they fought daily, the ugliness they saw daily. So they kind of had mixed feelings. But you know, we discussed that as we would celebrate our own way, because yes, it's a great accomplishment, but it's more important that we are gathering with those that we love and they can celebrate them and tell them. So like I said, if we had to line up cars, if we had to, whatever we had to do, we could do that. But it also for us would not mean the end of the world, as like you're saying. There are some people that are like, I mean, they are going through it. And I can't wrap my mind around that. That is probably because of my upbringing. You know, I cannot wrap my mind around, yes, it's a time of celebration, all of that, but your life is ending because your child isn't going to walk at graduation. Like, I don't, that just doesn't, those two don't come together for me. You know, very much like I said, with a child celebrating, you know, a momentous birthday, we're doing things very differently. And those, you know, we've had numerous phone calls. Hey, are you guys okay? Do you need food? Do you need money? We know you're a single parent, you're out of work. And it's all great. You know, people are thinking of that, but then I'm also thinking there are a lot of people in my boat that aren't okay, you know? So it's, that's been very, very heavy on my mind recently. And, you know, just being at home, I've been able to focus more. And I'm able to do more devotions, and I'm able to simplify. And for me, this has been a time of like I've come alive, which is weird to say, because we don't have all those extras. And you know, I think my children said it best, that people get so confused by the graduation, kind of like the wedding, and not focusing on the marriage aspect, the part that really matters. So.
Yeah, that resonates with me, Melissa. Thanks for sharing. I feel like I'm thriving.
In every way.
Yeah, and that feeds into my guilt, because some people are literally struggling to survive.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Oh, may I speak?
Absolutely.
I feel all those things. I'm in an odd house dog sitting situation. The woman that lives here is in assisted living. So I'm in this gorgeous house. There's a sauna in the basement. There's workout machines. I have everything I need. I'm retired. I don't have to worry about, I'm not getting any income. And yet there is that almost, if you want to call it survivor guilt kind of a thing going on in my head and my space. But I too am taking this time to, if you will, come alive. I'm very spiritual in different ways than traditional religion, but I've been able to spend a lot more time with that in terms of my own personal growth, and I love that. And there are times I do find myself getting a little angry when people are, if you will, maybe complaining, oh, I can't graduate, I can't do whatever. I do volunteer work in Tanzania, so I get third world countries, and I'm like, let's take a trip. So I got to battle with myself and know that it's all relative to each person, and be fair about that. I recently had a very dear friend that died of cancer. The virus had nothing to do with it. And they just did, Tuesday, they did a Zoom memorial because they had no other choice. And it was beautiful. It was so nicely done. It was so hard though, because nobody could hug anybody. You know, you had to like try to just absorb that love energy, you know, through technology, which I think you can. But it's just been such a bizarre time and such a reflective time. And I vacillate, I have anger, I buried that with a deep sadness, but I get out of that and I have hope. I have hope that as a human race, many people will evolve, if you will, into a better space of understanding and compassion for people and realizing what our true priorities are. So that's what I wanted to share. Oh, I had one other little thing. I keep hearing this, we're all in this together, we're all in this together. And I read something recently and it's like, we're all in the same storm, but we are not all in the same boat. And that's so true. So I just want to share that part. And I'm done. Thank you.
Thanks, Marion. Actually,
Thank
I just
you.
want to highlight one thing that you just said that I thought was really powerful, that we have grief around not being able to grieve the way we usually do. Like not being able to have a memorial service, not being able to comfort each other physically. That's really profound.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, please.
I was just listening to both your stories, and I like really appreciate how both of you kind of recognize injustice. And if I'm honest, like I miss middle class luxuries right now, like completely privileged showing. But if I'm honest with you, like I miss like taking my daughter to the Y pool, the YMCA. I miss like eating at restaurants. I miss shopping at Target. And I recognize that comes from privilege, and I recognize that those systems I guess I've noticed like my happiness has come from systems that haven't worked for a lot of people. And I'm just questioning like why my happiness is so tied to capitalism.
Yeah.
And I think like I'm always talking about this, right? Like I'm always talking about the contradictions and holding them up. That's why I love those Venn diagrams, because I can hold up that I care about social justice for all people. And I can also hold up that like I'm benefiting from it. And I sometimes enjoy capitalism and enjoy classism. You know, I benefit from it. So when it's taken from you, or it's kind of a similar experience when you realize white privilege for the first time and you're like, oh, shoot. What does this mean? I kind of feel like this time is also a time where, you know, I've examined my privilege before economically. I was raised like upper middle class, well, probably more upper class, and then I'm more middle class now. So I've really like looked at what that journey downward means. But I'm just gonna keep it honest. Like I really miss the middle class lifestyle that I had before this.
You know, Whitney, a lot of what you just said resonates with me. And the first one of your building community chats that you hosted here, you and Johnny, that I attended, you spoke a lot of around storytelling as healing. And when people share their stories and others resonate with that story, it can really build community. And I listened to what you were saying, and I was reminded of the day that I decided I have to get out of this house. I've walked my block. I know every flower in every flower bed of every house in my neighborhood. And so I got in my car and I took a drive, and I had the windows down and I smelled the smells of outside, whether it was cars. I heard sounds that I don't hear in my house. And it felt very vibrant, just taking a silly little drive. And then I drove by a Starbucks that was open.
Mm-hmm.
I have never turned the wheel of my car faster than I did at that moment to turn into a Starbucks. And here's the kicker of that. I waited in a fairly long drive-through line. I got a coffee that I could have made at home, had the stuff at home to make it. And I savored every sip of that as if it was the most wonderful thing that I'd never had before. And I started to think about why this coffee was so amazing. Why was this moment? Why did it feel so new and amazing? And when I started to unpack that, it was because I don't get to control where I go right now. I don't get to, that was such a luxury that we don't get to have all the time right now. And how much privilege is wrapped up in that story. I had a car that I could drive to take me there, to spend $5 on some silly drink that I could have made at home with the ingredients I had here. And it was the grieving of the loss of being able to do that whenever we want. And then the guilt that I felt after. So all of those things are wrapped up in each other.
Thank you so much. That's really interesting. I'm going to let others comment, but I really appreciate that. It helps me feel seen.
Like when you were talking, it kind of rang true what, we are okay here. And so we've had conversations with the kids. They're like, what about our friends who may not be okay? We had to celebrate a 16th birthday in isolation. So that meant, you didn't see your family. So we Zoomed and we had virtual dinner. It's just different, right? But we too have started taking walks down our country road. Luckily, we live in the country and can get out. But then we started noticing there's a house that we never knew was there. There's a field, and look at the birds out and hearing the birds and just things that you didn't stop and think about before. And then we were like, why have we never done that? So the why, I've been thinking about like, why did we not do that before? But thankful that we are now. And then when life returns to normal, can we still do that?
Yeah, it's almost thank you, Deetra. It's almost like, I don't know if this is the right term that I'm looking for, but it's almost a forced mindfulness where you're being forced to notice things that we didn't notice before. I think about Marion's story and Dr. Taylor saying that they're people are thriving in different ways right now that they haven't taken the time to do. And it's almost a forced kind of, I hear sounds that I don't hear. I see things that I haven't seen before. I'm noticing more things. I'm noticing more emotions in my own life because there's not the noise right now. I don't know, Dr. Taylor, what do you think about that?
Yes, this plays into the privilege that I am recognizing. Like I have the privilege, first of all, to have a job that's not threatened by this. That's kind of where my thoughts began, because I know people who don't have that luxury anymore. So I can go on to Amazon and buy a sewing machine. I can pay for guitar lessons. I can get fabric and supplies to start doing projects. So I'm doing all these things that I've wanted to do. So I'm kind of forced into this, kind of forced into having this opportunity, this time now to do it. But it is a luxury. It is privilege. I don't have to worry about getting harassed when I go to the supermarket because I'm not Asian. I don't have to worry about whether I can wear a mask or not because I'm not Black. all of these things are on my mind. I'd love to hear thoughts from other folks.
A question. So this, I don't know, this whole realm, right? Spaces like this are fairly new to me. And so I'm trying to do my best to learn more and take in and things like that. And I've started to see more and more people talking about spending their privilege. And I haven't necessarily found like a great article on it or resource. So I was wondering if in your expertise, you had anything to share on that topic.
What do you mean spending?
So basically like the idea, and again, I don't have like, I'm still looking for resources on this. So my understanding of it is certainly not complete. But it was like the act of like acknowledging your privilege in certain areas and then using it to help others.
Maybe
Yes, I'm in a fortunate position because that's my job, that I can create programs. So right now I'm bringing in a speaker to talk about empowerment and claiming space. That I'm having trouble as a person who's transgender and was socialized as female, and also a member of the LGBT community. People in marginalized populations tend to make themselves small, as do women. And so claiming my space in public is something that I've been struggling with, because it's almost always men, it's almost always white men who get too close to me. And I find that really fascinating, and claiming my space is challenging. But I'm bringing in an empowerment coach to do a public webinar. This will be publicized through Extension, by the way. So hopefully you'll hear about it and be able to attend. I'm co-creating with two other folks an implicit bias, active bystander workshop to help people deal with microaggressions right now. But that's my job, so I get to do that. How are other people, so to speak, spending their privilege?
We kind of had like a case, and I know Jenna, you and I might have talked about this a little bit, so it might connect to the terms you're using. A man from our church sent a rather large amount of money to our house here, and basically was like, go buy food for your students. And he's in a position where he doesn't work anymore. He worked at Ford. Like, he very much has the things that we usually associate with privilege. And so I kind of view like spending your privilege as he had this money that he wasn't going to use in values, giving back to people. So that was his way to maybe help out like the students that I have in my classroom. So that's kind of how I guess I viewed it.
Jen, do you want to elaborate? I feel like we had a conversation similar to this. I've never heard the term spending your privilege, but it makes me think of some other readings we've done. Do you care to share?
Yeah, I was trying to like type this whole thing, so yeah, it's probably easier. I was like, oh, how do I frantically type it? But yeah, so Audre Lorde has this piece called "The Uses of Anger: Women Responding to Racism," and she says like, my response to racism is anger, right? Like, in that there's power in anger. But she also very much addresses this idea of guilt, and particularly the idea of like white women guilt in spaces of like feminism, right? And so there, like, I wish I could read the whole thing to y'all, but she there's a specific quote. She talks about, "I cannot hide my anger to spare your guilt nor hurt feelings, nor answering anger, for to do so insults and trivializes all of our efforts." And so she says, guilt is not a response to anger. It is a response to one's own actions or lack of action. If it leads to change, then it can be useful, since then no longer guilt, but the beginning of knowledge. Yet all too often, guilt is just another name for impotence, for defensiveness, for destructive of communication. It becomes a device to protect ignorance and the continuation of things the way they are, the ultimate protection for changelessness. And so she goes on to say, "I have no creative use for guilt, yours or my own. Guilt is another way of avoiding informed action, of buying time out of the pressing need to make clear choices, out of the approaching storm that can feed the earth as well as bend the trees." And she, I mean, the whole piece has a ton of stuff, but that was that was a piece of it. And I always think about this, about how like, I think of guilt as a selfish emotion. So particularly when I'm engaged in racial justice work, and I do a lot of like individual deconstruction of what that means. And I call it like selfish white feelings. And so I always try to ask myself, like, in what ways are my selfish white feelings, like, are they becoming ways that I'm bleeding onto other people? In what ways are they becoming all about me and therefore not becoming about racial justice work? And that area is dangerous when it becomes all about like me, right? Now that on the same hand, right, like everything is both and, that doesn't mean that I can sit here and pretend like my white guilt isn't a real thing, right? Like that, or that my privilege to sit here in my house with my cat sitting on my lap isn't a real thing. I can acknowledge that, but I love this Audre Lorde piece because she talks about like, what are you doing with that guilt? Like, it's okay to have that and acknowledge it, but let's not sit in it, because there's things that we can do, right? And so, yeah, that whole piece is really powerful. And so I just want to share that.
Thank you for sharing that, Jen. And I'm glad that you didn't type all of that out.
I actually have a note on my desk about that, uses of angers. What do you do with the guilt? How do you use it? Thank you for bringing that up. Just a quick note, I forgot about the chat, and thank you all for contributing to the chat box. I just reviewed everything that was coming up there. I added a link to a resource that was put out by my colleague Lena Tenney at the Kirwan Institute. It's a handout that I provide in my implicit bias workshop on being an active bystander. I'm also going to include a link to their YouTube video, in which it's the YouTube of their presentation. And this is also the person who I'm collaborating with to create a hybrid my implicit bias with their active bystander training that we'll be putting together and presenting sometime in May. So I'm going to put the link to the YouTube, but I think being an active bystander is a great way to spend your privilege, and learning how to do that is something that takes time. First of all, it's important to challenging sometimes to even recognize when an injustice is happening, let alone figuring out how to address it. So let me do that here.
Guilt.
There we go.
Yes, Elizabeth.
Actually, it's Ann, the mom.
Hey, Ann.
Hi, honey. Most of you don't know me. I'm a kindergarten teacher in Lorain City Schools. We're under CEO takeover, so there's a lot of stress there. My parents are 89, so when I get done teaching every day, I go over to their home and help cook dinner, do the grocery shopping, spend time with them. And by 8 o'clock, it's time for me to get ready to go, because I have to go home and do stuff at my house, get ready for the next day of school. And I feel a tremendous amount of guilt because they would like me to stay overnight. My mother has suggested you can wear my pajamas, you know, and I feel a tremendous amount of guilt over it. And I feel, because I hear from other friends who'll say, you're so lucky, you still have your parents. And Liz has gone down and lives in Columbus now, and I'm so proud of what she's doing. She calls regularly, but it's really on me. My sister's in Massachusetts. So I feel this tremendous amount of guilt that I don't spend as much time with my parents as I should. And now we've had this time in Lorain, we don't have the requirements that other school districts have. And I still feel now even worse about it. Like, I should be over there. We still go over and spend time with them. We play cards, we do everything. But I had this even more increased amount of guilt because I have the time, but yet I'm over here trying to do things here too. So thank you.
I wanted to just say, I just really resonated with that. My grandma's 87 and she lives in DC, and I feel so much guilt all the time. I'm like, I could really go home to DC more often. Like I could do these things. Like I could be there. I could, you know, but then I also, so like, again, I try to always think of it as both and is, yes, I could do those things, and I have before. Like I've spent significant time there, and it disrupts my entire life. I can't function like in my own regular life. And I think about it as like, I have to take care of me so that I can be like very present in the moment when I am with her and have these dedicated times, but like not overextend myself. I haven't got it right yet, but that just resonated with me, and just thank you for sharing. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And it resonated with me as well. It was kind of a bit of levity as Leo and I were figuring out, you know, we were unsure of what our topic was. He shared that with us this morning, or when we got started, around guilt and grief. And I was a couple years ago, I was my mother's caretaker, and she lived in Mansfield, Ohio. And so that's about an hour, it's about an hour drive from where I live right now. And so once a week, I drove to her house, and for that day, I was her caretaker. She was in hospice. And there was a tremendous amount of guilt when I left, even though I knew she was going to be taken care of the next day by the next, it took a village, so the next person. But there was a tremendous amount of guilt. And when she passed, that Kubler and Ross, the 5 stages of grief, it's set in textbook style. And as I worked through that, the guilt kept weaving in with the grief. And I've gotten to the point of the acceptance phase now, which is lovely, but that doesn't mean that some of those things still don't creep in. And that would be, I guess, the reason I share that story is that, you know, if you have guilt and it's woven in with grief, whether it's grief about, you know, losing an event, whether it's a grief about losing a person in your life, those things still feel very real. And the amount of grace that we give ourselves, I think, is critical to understand that we are juggling much more than just Thursday. We're juggling the future. We're juggling things from our past that we haven't reconciled, and everything in between. So, you know, as you go through, and if you remember the old toy, the spirograph, where it was plastic circles and you stuck your pencil in and you went like this and it made these beautiful flower shapes. There were multiple intersects in those. And that really represents all of the things we're talking about. They're not mutually exclusive. They will always talk to each other, all of those feelings. So I think that grace with ourselves, grace with each other. I don't know what stage of anything that any of you are in right now. So I have to always be mindful of that.
I promise I'm gonna stop dominating it, but I did that also just really resonated with me. But I liked this idea of being gentle with ourselves and being gentle with others, but this idea that like grief comes in waves. It's not something that you necessarily ever get over. I went through a very similar experience with my mother 7 years ago, and it's not something that you just one day you're over it. It's something that is going to continue to come and come and come and come. It's forever. So figuring out how to navigate that, and then sometimes just figuring out how to just like sit in it sometimes, because that's what you need to do at that time. And just, yeah, I can preach, be gentle with yourself, but I don't actually do it to myself. So I love that you mentioned that about grace. Thank you.
Anyone else want to share if any of that has resonated with you?
So can I offer a little bit of levity, because I personally, I feel stressed and worried. I mean, just a lot of like really heavy things. So Erica, when you were sharing that and you said the old spirograph, you know what? It's not that old. And now you have reminded me, maybe I need to take it out of our craft closet for my child to do, because you know, we're in tears or in this, it's just a lot. So he got one for Christmas. So thank you for that image. And it's a really wonderful image as we're going through this process, but I might have to do that this week. Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm glad they're still making those. That was one of my favorites. And I wish on the bingo card, the COVID-19 bingo card, for a bit of levity, I think that one of the squares should be a jigsaw puzzle that people are doing jigsaw puzzles. And for whatever reason, and it's fascinating to me, I have seen a higher propensity of people baking banana bread than I have ever have in my life.
Yeah, I was at Target the other day. Whitney, why aren't you shopping at Target? I go there for my cat litter, and while I'm there, I'm like, I might as well just look at the puzzles.
I'm so
And-
disappointed because Delaware doesn't have a Target, so it's like a special trip.
Okay. Well, actually, I was disappointed. Target really didn't have puzzles. I mean, actually, I did find them, but I did find some at Joann's because I went there to get fabric for masks. So that's my justification for going to Joann Fabric. And they had a pretty decent puzzle selection, but it was ransacked.
They're a popular thing right now.
They are.
They are popular.
I put this in the chat box, and I want to read it to you because I just felt so much from Anne's story, and I feel like a lot of us can relate to that guilt, whether it's we're taking care of our parents, or we're parents that are taking care of our kids right now, or we're teachers that can't be there physically in person, whatever the situation. This is a radical gratitude spell that I read sometimes in some of the workshops that Johnny and I do, and it's for when you're meeting a stranger or a friend or anyone who's working for justice and liberation. It's written by Adrienne Marie Brown, and she says, "You are a miracle walking. I greet you with wonder. In a world which seeks to own your joy and your imagination, you have chosen to be free, every day as a practice. I can never know the struggles you went through to get here, but I know you have swum upstream, and at times it has been lonely. I want you to know I honor the choices you made in solitude, and I honor the work you have done to belong. I honor your commitment to that which is larger than yourself and your journey, to love the particular container of life that is you. You are enough, your work is enough, you are needed, your work is sacred, you are here, and I'm grateful."
Wow, that's amazing.
I think it's something that we can all read and remember, that we are enough in this time, and we're doing the best to make the choices that often we're making alone. At the end of the day, we're reflecting, what could I have done better, and just to know that it's enough. And at times it's been lonely, but that we're here and this space is for us. And it just makes me sad because I want the best for all of you.
I just had a thought. I don't know why that prompted me, but I was speaking to a friend of mine, also happens to be my ex-wife, but we've become good friends over the past year. And she was raised on Cape Cod, middle-ish, upper-ish class, never had to worry about anything. Her dad retired early. He recently told her that he didn't need the stimulus check. He's he wishes they would send it to people who needed it on a needs basis, because it really isn't impacting him. And she made a comment to me about how she thought that people, it was their own fault if they were struggling financially because they didn't have a nest egg. And I was like, wait a minute, hold up. Do you understand how many people are barely living paycheck to paycheck? And that not having a job, not having that one paycheck is putting them in crisis, literally not being able to buy food. And just having that conversation made her recognize her privilege. Probably shouldn't surprise you that she's white, and also cisgender and heterosexual. So, and having that background on the Cape prepared her for being blind to her own privilege. So that is a way that we can use our guilt for good. It's just having conversations with people. The end.
No, I'm so glad that you shared that, Leo. That I think of that in terms of being a parent, and what do we choose to say in front of our children? And what are we choosing to talk about when we watch the news? And when our kids make jokes, are we correcting them? And really hammering in some of those really important things that we're talking about today. I have a teenager who I think is pretty cool. I mean, and she's, you know, she's got an EQ coach for a mom, so she doesn't have much of a chance to be a knucklehead, but she makes jokes about coronavirus, as do her friends. And, you know how social circles work. And I really have to be intentional to interrupt that, interrupt her bias around the white suburban place that we live, and to understand that our experience isn't everyone else's experience. And I think building those conversations with kiddos from a younger age just bodes well for the future.
I agree with you, Erica. And then we had the conversation in this house because we had a leader of our country not using appropriate language. So we had to have that discussion of how it was not appropriate.
I had two things. So for those of you that aren't in education, you get an NEA Today magazine, and my mom pulled it just because it goes a lot with my master's programs on cultural competency and diversity and inclusion and a lot of just different realms. And one of the articles in it is titled "Parents Aren't Talking to Their Kids About Race." So it was something that I got to bring to my discussion board this week with many other people in my program, and just kind of like you said, like, what are we showing our children when not only what they're hearing but also like what they're seeing. And during this time I've tried to be very calm, which if you know me, I'm never calm. I'm like very extroverted. I'm running around wild, driving my family crazy. But I think for me, being in front of my kids Monday, we had a neighborhood drive, and just being as calm as possible, because I want to show them that even though this is a scary time and it's okay to have feelings, like it's kind of like when your kid falls and scratches their knee, if you make a big deal about it, they're going to get more upset. So just trying to remain calm has been really important. And then something else that I saw yesterday was Governor DeWine actually posted against one of the senators. His name's like Andrew Brenner. Yeah. He had made a very disrespectful comment, and I was very pleased that Governor DeWine did stand up and say something. I think in this time, it doesn't matter how you identify politically, how you identify sexually, no matter what, like we're all human beings, and we need to start respecting each other and setting those boundaries of what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. But I definitely think it starts with us and setting that example for our kids, because they are the future generation.
I've heard some folks talk about, did I interrupt you, Leo?
No, I was just going to comment on an exchange that's going on in the chat.
Yes.
If you want to go there. Jen is talking about her mother-in-law sending COVID memes like it's her job and not knowing how to respond anymore. Because I was sharing that it was good that my ex-wife understood immediately what I was talking about when I pointed out, you have privilege. Other people don't. It's when someone doesn't get it and they defend their privilege that feeds my anger, because anger is my response. And Jenna was kind of sharing that experience as well. So the issue is, how do we respond? How do we continue to try to advocate when someone doesn't get it? And how do we take care of ourselves? Because that anger can fuel me and make me miserable. So yeah. At what point do I have to just give up?
I think that's what I'm struggling with most, Dr. Taylor. Like my mother-in-law have a wonderful relationship. You know, I love her very much, but she's in a bubble right now. And her husband has some beliefs on this that are wild. You know, so she's having that kind of reinforcement constantly. And you know, we have a family group text, of course, so the meme will come and, you know, nobody responds because what are you supposed to do? And then we get a text like, oh, you must not like me. I'm not funny. Like, you don't want to spend time with me. You don't want to talk with me. And I'm like, it's not it. But I just can't figure out a way to communicate to her how it makes me feel. Or a way to help like change the behavior, because nothing we have done has worked, and we have like several siblings that are working on it.
Remove yourself from the group text. Step 1. Unfortunately, I've had to do that with family and friends and social media. Like, you know, and because they'll ask you, well, why did you remove yourself? Because it'll say so-and-so removed themselves. When they ask why you removed, and I have said, because I thought the comments were inappropriate and insensitive, and you are not in a place to deal with that right now. You are working on survival for yourself and your family, and that's where you need to put your focus. Not saying I hate the crap you're posting, but trying to be as right down the middle as I could, you know. So
another thing that I found very helpful is my parents are very concerned that I go out and do the grocery shopping. I'm asthmatic, and prior to this virus, I was getting over pneumonia. But yet when I go to get my mom's grocery list, there's always like 200 items on there. And I say, Mom, we really don't need 200 items. But I've learned that my parents both grew up in the Depression. And so you don't want 2 cans of soup, you want 50 cans of soup. And at first I was very upset. I'm like, we don't need this. Other people need the food more than we do to sit in your downstairs shelf. But I've come to learn that's of their age, that's of their mentalness. And sometimes the things that they say, you know, the other day my mom made a horrible comment. She said, poor people are going to get the COVID virus and other people are not. And it's about educating your older parents. And it's about sometimes accepting like their mentalness, that they're still in the 1930s, basically, when it comes to grocery shopping. And
we
that
do
is
a lot of educating,
Yeah.
in the household. Please know that.
Yes.
Like, constantly.
and they're better people because they now understand
Yeah,
things.
they've gotten a lot better. I rode the high horse for a very long time.
And we love them.
We
love
do.
them dearly.
I'm like, check yourself.
If you ever need soup, she has 50 cans.
Let us know.
Every kind you could imagine.
I get that. I want to comment on the memes. I'm wondering, for some people, and I'm not sure which memes you're talking about in particular that are offensive. I mean, I've seen some that are, and I have to confess there are some that make me laugh. And I think, and maybe I'll speak for myself, and maybe this is the case for other people, sometimes that's the only thing I can laugh at during the day. It may be the only thing I find that's funny, knowing full well that I'm masking the fear underneath it. And it's a way maybe to denial. I don't know what you want to call it. And, you know, maybe asking this person, why do you think that's funny? Is there something below? I mean, I believe fear is a base for so many emotions. And I'm wondering if maybe there's a way to communicate or dialogue with people that are posting things that you find insensitive, instead of cutting them off completely, because I'm feeling like being gentle with ourselves and with others is so important right now. Like I got in a kind of fight-ish, not verbal, like upset with someone recently. And, you know, I'm still reeling from it because I'm like, I don't want to be that way. I want to put the love out there. It's all about the love. It's all about the love. And so I'm more sensitive to those kinds of things and being mindful of being kind. And so maybe it's a reaching out to this person, like what motivates you to post these things? And what about this one do you think is funny? And just make it a dialogue. Maybe the person needs somebody to talk to. I don't know. I just kind of want to take that in a different perspective. So something to
Yeah.
consider.
Thank you, Marion. You know, as you were talking, I was thinking about how difficult it is to be vulnerable. And when you don't feel like you can be, some of those defense mechanisms are humor and anger, instead of getting down to what it truly is that you're feeling in that moment. And so I think we see a lot of social media posts that are because that's much easier than being vulnerable and saying, I have anxiety, or I feel depressed, you know, I miss people in my life. So yeah, I think that reaching out to a person on an individual level, maybe aside from a social post and saying, it sounds like you're feeling something. Is, you know, do you need to talk? So that's a great tip, Marion. Thank you.
We have about 7 minutes left. I'd like to just create some space for anyone who has a thought that they've wanted to share. Any other comments?
I know I really got like swept up in the memes at the start of it all, thinking like, oh, that's funny, and it was just like that. It was a distraction from like the fears and anxiety surrounding it. And I remember like this conversation is just so beneficial to watch, because it's kind of like, okay, this is another instance where I think I can take the back seat with sharing the meme and thinking that's funny, because a lot of people don't find it funny. And it's not even real humor for me. It's masking that fear. So like, just like processing all that, I've been thinking a lot through this. And I think even after class one day, Dr. Doyle and I discussed this, like what we owe each other and that kind of thing. Like From the Good Place is where that, like, I got that line from. But part of it was, when can you take the back seat to help someone else and like get the best situation? Because I know we talk a lot about self-care, but what care do we do for ourselves isn't really needed but more wanted. And for me, like, those memes are definitely a part of it, in the jokes, and not taking it seriously enough when it's all too serious for some people. I just like really appreciate the conversation, because it's made me like rethink through that and think, okay, this is not something you need right now. This is not something that really helps you right now. So why is it something that we're going to continue?
Thanks, Jack, for sharing that.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful, Jack. How like you kind of narrated, you know, sharing that meme and then doing that self-examination. And I mean, I come from a philosophy that's like, we really need to be tender with one another and give each other so much grace. And I like that you shared that, because it kind of humanizes. Like, I think so often we see social media and we're like, we're going to battle, we're like fighting these people, we're arguing these people. And I just really appreciate your vulnerability, because it reminds us that everyone is processing at different speeds, and people have been so gentle in my life when I've made mistakes and when I've been offensive. And so thank you for sharing and reminding us of the question, what do we owe each other?
I just wanted to say thank you, because Jack is my student. I just love him.
Oh.
But I was so excited he was here, y'all. But yeah, no, Jack, just thank you for sharing that. It was just incredibly powerful, and I'm glad you brought up the question of like, what do we owe each other? Because I was thinking about our conversation after class the other week about, yeah, we were talking about vulnerability and what do we owe each other and what does it mean to be in community. And you shared some really powerful things. I was like, I was hoping you would. So just thank you.
You know, often, like, if you read the lists of ideas of how to, you know, handle stress or, you know, keep yourself focused on the positive, they say use humor. But it's really hard because humor is so different and so personal. So I think, you know, I think Jack kind of hit on that too. You know, some memes are funny and they are even designed to be hurtful to someone, but they definitely could be because they're kind of flippant. And I was looking, yeah, Melissa had a good point too, you know, getting that kindness out there along with all the other stuff that goes by. So one strategy I found, just because professionally and personally, and as a mom, I don't think I should be cussing a lot, but I find some of the stuff really funny, and I'm not going to put it out there, and I can be very sarcastic and flippant. So I have my very, very small group of people I can forward those things that they just know it's in, even maybe making fun of the person who designed the meme, like how stupid could they be, right? But it's not anything I'm ever going to put out there to be misread or to be hurtful.
I'm going to point out something. Whitney shared a link to a resource. I share a link to a Boston Globe article. She submits a link to a dissertation. So
It's so good.
167 pages, you got time to read it. But it's called Civic Tenderness, Love's Role in Achieving Justice. Thank you for sharing that, Whitney.
You're welcome. You don't have to read it by next week or anything.
We have a couple minutes left. Any last thoughts, comments? Thank you all for sharing.
Yeah, thank you all for having us.
Yes, thank you. This is my first time here. I just put a little note out. I will definitely be back. This has been very profound and very helpful. I love the depth of people, and that's something I really miss. So I'm just really grateful to have found this group. Thank you, Whitney, so much.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
thank you all.
For Thursday.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. It's been recorded, so I'll make sure to drop that later today, and I'll include the chat box too, because I know we shared a lot of resources.